It should be impossible to explain these kind of experiences by just claiming the never proven assumption that consciousness is a byproduct of brain function.
Well, here we are in the city of Welp in the Netherlands, and we came here to visit Dr. Pim van Lommel. Pim has done an extensive research in the field of near-death experience. He's done it for more than 10 years with involvement of 10 hospitals in the Netherlands. And the results of this research were published in Lancet, a very prestigious medical journal. Nice meeting you.
You should not expect patients to have memories. You should not expect the patient to have any kind of consciousness as well, because the brain doesn't function at all. It started with the Dutch version.
Yeah,
it's now the 29th print. It's still the largest study ever done, and the only study with statistical analysis as well.
But you never got any funding for it, really?
No.
You really done this whole study, 10 years, just as out of curiosity, based on volunteer work?
Evening, weekends, and taking some holidays.
Wow.
Science is asking questions with an open mind. I was asking questions with an open mind. Here you see the heart stops, a cardiac arrest. The EEG changes after 5 seconds, it becomes like this. And after 18 seconds, the EEG is flatlined as well. The electroactivity of the brain has ceased. And without the brain and without the eyes, you can perceive, which is 360 degrees around. You can see details and overview at the same moment. Consciousness is beyond time and beyond space. It's always everywhere, inside and outside. It's an old
Really
English.
nice.
It is an old English one. You can
It's
see
really
it.
nice.
Yeah, the old English rose. And we have to change. We have to expand science into post-material science. We have to change the paradigm to include subjective experiences.
Dr. Pim van Lommel, thank you very much for receiving us in your wonderful house.
You're welcome.
You are a former cardiologist, and for more than 10 years you are doing extensive NDE research with the involvement of 10 hospitals in the Netherlands. And the results have been published in Lancet, a prestigious medical journal that explores the latest high-quality research. You have also written a book, Consciousness Beyond Life, translated into 11 languages. More than 400,000 copies have been sold worldwide. You're considered one of the leading authorities in the field of scientific research on NDE, and we hope that you can help us answer the following question. Is consciousness an epiphenomenon of brain activity, as many neuroscientists claim it to be? Or in other words, is consciousness a byproduct of brain activity?
The answer is short. No.
Thank you. The end of interview.
No.
But we want to start with maybe give us a bit of sense. How did you get involved in the research, and why actually? Because many doctors, even today, dismiss of it. They say it's either hallucination or it's some weird religious experience. So why you, trained as cardiologist in materialist paradigm, got involved in the first place?
Yeah. Well, I was, as a young doctor, a materialist cardiologist. And when I started to work in a coronary care unit in 1969 as a young rotating intern, I was working in one of the first coronary care units in the Netherlands. Before 1967, all patients died of cardiac arrest. So modern CPR techniques like defibrillation and external chest compression became available in 68, 69. So we had a patient on the new coronary care unit, about 44 years old, I think, and he had a cardiac arrest because of a myocardial infarction. And we started to resuscitate him, and we had several shocks on him, and after about 4 minutes he regained consciousness. We were very happy as a resuscitating. It was all new. I was the doctor in charge. It was all new for us. But the patient came back, and the patient was extremely disappointed and told me about a tunnel and a light and music and beautiful landscape. I'll never forget I've forgotten this event, but I never did anything with it. I was a young doctor starting my specialization at a young family, a family with young children. So only in 1986, I read a book by George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, where he describes his very deep near-death experience as a medical student in 1943. He died of fundibulal pneumonia, and there were no antibiotics available for this medical student, so he died. And his body was covered with a sheet. And the nurse was so upset that this young medical student had died that he was able to persuade the doctor to give him an injection of adrenaline right into his heart, which was quite uncommon in the time. But after 9 minutes of death, he came back. Had a problem to find his body back because it was covered with a sheet, but he has his hand out under the sheet where he saw his fraternity ring. He said, well, that must be me. Anyway, but he had a very impressive near-death experience. All the aspects we know now, he had also in dark regions as well. Out-of-body experience in a place hundreds of miles where this happened, and he later went there to see if it really was the place where he had been. He had been there as well during the period of death. So then I was so, and I had never heard about the death experience before. I had never read the book by Raymond Moody, Life After Life, which was published in 1975. But from reading that book, I started to ask patients when they had survived a cardiac arrest if they could remember something from a period of unconsciousness, from a period of cardiac arrest. And within 2 years, out of 50 patients who had survived cardiac arrest, 12 patients shared the NDE with me. And that was the moment that my scientific curiosity started to grow, because I had learned on university, as we all learn still in school and university, that consciousness is a product of brain function. And we know in cardiac arrest, when you're deep unconscious, there are no body reflexes, no brainstem reflexes, no breathing, and I come to it later, then it should be impossible to have memories of an enhanced consciousness, with memories, with emotions, with cognition, with a possibility of perception out and above the body. It should be impossible. There had been just retrospective studies, and people thought it was side effect of drugs, hallucinations, side effect of neurotransmitters, dreams, trying to be interested, etc. So there were not real scientific explanations at all. And that's why we started a prospective study in Holland on survivors of cardiac arrest.
When was it the moment that you really went from being convinced that consciousness is a byproduct of brain activity to somebody who's saying, no, that's not the case? Was it a specific moment?
It took years.
Years?
It took years. So we did a prospective study of 4 years, where we interviewed 344 consecutive survivors of cardiac arrest in 10 Dutch hospitals. So I spoke to a lot of patients as well. But besides that, I spoke to other patients with the near-death experience as well. And we had a longitudinal study which taped interviews 2 years and 8 years with all late survivors of cardiac arrest who had an NDE, with a matched control group of patients who survived cardiac arrest without an NDE, with a matched control with the same age, the same gender, and the same time interval. And it was about the transformation. People have a transformation when they have an NDE. And we didn't know if the transformation is due to the cardiac arrest or due to the near-death experience. That had never been studied in a prospective design before. So I've met many, many people. And during the course of years, I rather became convinced, also by reading articles and books, etc., that it should be impossible to explain these kind of experiences by just claiming the never proven assumption that consciousness is a byproduct of brain function. It's still a never proven hypothesis, but everybody believes it's true. It has never been proven.
And I prepared for myself a list of possible explanations from point of view of the mainstream science. So if we just explore that. If I go
yeah.
through the list,
No,
tell me, what, yes or no, is it maybe an explanation after all?
I can start with the results of our prospective study. So we wanted to know if there could be an explanation for the cause of a near-death experience. And we compared the 18% of patients with a near-death experience and the 82% of patients with a cardiac arrest who had no memories at all. Then first of all, we were looking for lack of oxygen in the brain, anoxia. So that lack of oxygen could be an explanation people has been saying before. But there was no difference at all. If you had a cardiac arrest of 3 minutes or 8 minutes, didn't matter at all. If you have been unconscious for 5 minutes or 3 weeks in coma, didn't matter at all. If you have a short cardiac arrest, an induced cardiac arrest in electrophysiological studies in the cath lab, didn't matter at all. They were always resuscitated within 30 minutes. A complicated CPR with a lot of medication didn't matter at all. All patients in our study had been unconscious because of lack of oxygen in the brain. Just 80% reported near-death experience. And there was no difference at all in the severity of anoxia at all between the two groups. So we could exclude anoxia of the brain as an explanation for the cause of near-death experience. Then you had the psychological explanation, fear of death. We could exclude it. Because mostly people who have a cardiac arrest don't know that they will have a cardiac arrest, so they don't have fear at all. You have fear because you have a myocardial infarction. But also the study of Bruce Grayson, where you interviewed him later, he said, what happens there? All doctors and nurses are around me, but why are they here? So they don't know about a cardiac arrest. Then they give a medication. There was no difference at all between the given medication with and without a near-death experience. Pre-knowledge that you know that these experiences are possible. No difference at all. Religion. Christian, Muslim, atheist, didn't matter at all. Gender didn't matter at all. Education didn't matter at all. Age did matter. When the group who were younger had more near-death experiences. So the age may play a role. And women had more elements they reported, they had deeper NDEs. But to have an explanation for the cause of the near-death experience, we could exclude all the existing theories. And then you have the problem, near-death experience is a subjective experience. So how can you prove a subjective experience? That's why we did the longitudinal study about the transformation. And we saw that the main transformation is no fear of death anymore. A new insight what is important in life. This is empathy, compassion, and love, first towards yourself. Accept your own negative aspects. Have empathy, compassion towards others and towards nature, because they are connected with everybody else still. That's why they call it also an experience of oneness. So it's a kind of life insight experience, the near-death experience. And the third aspect is enhanced intuitive sensitivity. That they know what other people think and other people feel. They know about future events. They know when someone will die. They know when his mother died last week. They know someone will have cancer. You cannot know it, but they will know it because of enhanced intuitive sensitivity, which is quite a problem because they don't know it and they don't want to have this. And what we found out that just only the patient with a near-death experience had this classical transformation, which is the objective proof for the subjective experience, because you can prove with the questionnaires that really the transformation happens. So it's the objective proof of subjective experience.
And you can link the transformation directly to ND, not to meditation or use of psychedelics or any other...
No, it was just the group of patients we had a cardiac arrest. It was the only group we interviewed.
You know, it amazes me because, as I said, I made a list for myself, right? So, possible causes from point of view of mainstream science: hallucination, number one; release of neurochemicals, number
Perhaps
two.
about hallucination.
Yeah.
You need a functioning brain to have an hallucination. The brain doesn't function at all during cardiac arrest, so you can exclude hallucination.
Yeah, but then people say, hey, okay, but you know, cells remain viable for hours, not for minutes, what people think. And that's why consciousness lingers longer there. So linking therefore consciousness to matter to the body, right? So there are various arguments, but...
Shall I answer this?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Well, one living cell or surviving cell doesn't explain consciousness at all. To experience waking consciousness, so that's how we sit here, you need a functioning system of exchange of information and energy between all cortical neural centers, which is the global neural workspace. That's what you need according to modern neuroscience to experience consciousness. And we know from cardiac arrest, and we can come to it back later, there is no function of the cortex at all left. You have to initiate CPR within 5 to 10 minutes. Cardiac arrest is the first stage of dying. And when you don't initiate CPR, when you don't defibrillate the ventricular fibrillation, people will die because of irreversible damage to the brain. And we know from other studies that there could be some cells living, especially glial cells, living hours after cardiac arrest. But it does not explain at all the possibility of consciousness, because you need a functional global workspace for it. And perhaps it's now the moment also to explain what we know from the brain function during cardiac arrest, because that's a very important aspect. We have also been done studies for induced cardiac arrest, the patient who have an ICD, an internal defibrillator. And in the first years we did threshold testing. That means people get the ICD and then you induce cardiac arrest to find a good threshold to resuscitate it. Nowadays it's different. But they did this kind of studies, induced cardiac arrest in ICD patient with an EEG. They also did studies with an induced cardiac arrest in animals. And what you see, but it's the same what we see in cardiac arrest in patients on the cardiac ward and the coronary care unit, you lose consciousness within seconds. There are no body reflexes anymore, which is a function of the cortex. There are no brainstem reflexes anymore, the gag reflex. You can put a finger in someone's throat. The cortical reflex, fixed dilated pupils, which are brain stem reflexes, are gone. There's no breathing anymore. The breathing center is close to the brain stem. They stop breathing. So the clinical findings are a loss of all brain functions. And then when you have the EEG measurement, what is the measurement of the electrical activity of the cortex of the brain, you see a flatline EEG within 10 to 20 seconds. There's no patients resuscitated successfully within 20 seconds, always 2, 3, 4 minutes. And we also know that people who have a cardiac arrest outside the hospital, then the mortality is more than 90%, because you're not within 5 to 10 minutes you have adequate CPR. So finding some cells, there have been a study done in Holland that they found after 10 days of death, still somewhere in the brain a cell you could not resuscitate, but it was not really dead. But it doesn't say anything about consciousness at all.
They could grow a stem cell out of it, something like that. That's what I heard, yeah.
Cells are different. And neurons are very receptive for oxygen deprivation. When you have a muscle, you can want the blood to flow to your arm for 30 seconds. It doesn't matter. When you throw it up, muscle cells are still there. And also the cells of the heart can survive minutes to perhaps an hour or more. Not all cells will die. But the brain cells are very susceptible for deprivation of oxygen.
But you know, some doctors now claim that with new research they will be able to resuscitate people and bring them back completely hours after the clinical death. Do you believe in that?
No, I don't believe in it. What we do now, when people have an out-of-hospital arrest and they come in coma in the hospital, you put hypothermia of the brain or even of the body, you put in kind of artificial circulation with cold blood, try to prevent irreversible damage to the brain. But I don't know how many patients are coming back full, with a full consciousness, with a full functioning body. I doubt it. We know that when people will drown in a cold sea, in cold water, or have cardiac arrest in the snow, they can survive longer because cells will not have an irreversible death, damage, because of the cold temperature. But again, a survival of some cells is not the same as a fully functioning brain, which you need to have the waking consciousness.
There is one more argument I heard, and I'm wondering about your opinion about this. There was a lecture of one by a neuroscientist, and she was saying that even with the flatline EEG, we don't know what happens in subcortical, deeper regions of the brain and brainstem.
Right. Well, that's what we...
What do you think?
We also had the induced cardiac arrest in animals, and they did brainstem stimulation. There was no stimulation possible at all, which means that the brainstem didn't function anymore also in animals. You cannot do it in humans. So we know that in cardiac arrest also the brainstem stops, but also from the clinical findings. No brainstem reflexes. How can you talk about a functioning brainstem when there is no brainstem reflexes? When there's no breathing at all, but breathing central close to the brainstem. So they desperately try to find an explanation for their own dogma. What I told you before is the never proven assumption that consciousness is a product of brain function. But the problem is for them, for most neuroscientists and also philosophers and psychologists, is that because the study about near-death experience in patients who survive a cardiac arrest, we have to reconsider this never proven assumption, because people have no brain function at all. And still a percentage, about between 10 and 20% of those patients report an enhanced consciousness, far more consciousness than they have normally as waking consciousness. It's a different kind of consciousness. It's memories from early childhood, and with emotions and cognition. So we usually don't have memories from early childhood. And when you have the life review with memories, then you're connected with the consciousness of others. You relive your whole life. So when you took some thing from your little sister, 5 years old, you feel how sad she was, because you're connected with other people as well in a life review. So it's not just a memory, it's reliving. And people have a cardiac arrest for 5 minutes, you can talk for 1 week, because everything in that life review happens at the same time. The moment you focus on something or some place, you will be there. Where you have future events as well. So you are in a dimension of consciousness where past and future is available.
At the same time.
At the same time. So it's beyond time and beyond space, and that's what we call it non-locality. We know this, and everything is connected as well. So that we know this terminology from quantum physics. Quantum physics is not an explanation for non-local consciousness, but it's an analogy to understand what people try to tell us, because there's no words for it. It's such a problem to put your experience into words. It's an ineffable experience. So that's the problem and the challenge as well. But when you hear about the kind of consciousness, you have the enhanced consciousness in the moment that the brain doesn't function at all, it's the paradoxical occurrence of enhanced consciousness. That does not fit in the dogma that consciousness is a product. You should not expect patients to have memories. You should not expect the patient to have any kind of consciousness as well, because the brain doesn't function at all, or hardly function at all, and it's still the same.
You know, my biggest difficulty with the mainstream explanation so far for ND in science is, how do you explain the fact that some people, not everybody, some people who allegedly, when they come back, they tell the story of everything that they heard and saw happening in the room while they were resuscitated.
Exactly.
So how is that possible? If it's a hallucination, how is it possible that people heard and saw things happening while they were brain dead or clinical?
Brain death, it's clinical death.
Yeah, clinical death.
Clinical death.
Yeah,
It's
not
a period
brain.
of unconsciousness because of lack of circulation and breathing.
Yeah.
That's a clinical. And you have to resuscitate, start CPR within 5 to 10 minutes, other people will die. And what you ask about is the out-of-body experience. And the out-of-body experience is when you have this cardiac arrest. People can have the possibility to have perception out and above the lifeless body, from a position from the ceiling. And they see people, doctors, nurses, with CPR, and then they see a body, and they, oh, that's my body. They don't feel connected with it. They can see from above how this resuscitation room looks alike. Blind people can have perception during an NDE. Even blind people from birth in the 50s, from the last century, babies who were born after, let's say, 30 weeks, got 100% oxygen. And they all got blind because an atrophy of the eyeball and the nervus opticus. You don't have pictures when you dream, when you're born blind. And it was the first time in the NDE that patients, I described it in my book as well, also a book written by Ken Ring, Mind Sight. That the first time they saw a body with hair, and then they said that must be because I recognize a ring. But then they went through the ceiling of the hospital, and for the first time they saw trees and light, and it's not seeing with your eyes, but it's perceiving by your mind. I know someone who had a very strong glasses. Without glasses, she couldn't see anything. And then during the cardiac arrest, she could see everything. And then she saw her glasses beside the bed. And without the glasses, she couldn't see anything, just some misty, foggy side. So it's when you have an out-of-body experience, you have a perception beyond your body. At the moment, your brain doesn't function at all. But you cannot explain it when you say, or try to convince someone else that it is a product of brain function. The other thing is, who is seeing? When you are looking around by your eyes, then electromagnetic information waves come into your eye and into your retina. Then electromagnetic information goes through your optical nerve to your occipital lobe. And there is another electromagnetic activity. But who is seeing? It's not your brain, it's not your eye. It's your consciousness, who uses the brain and the eye as instrument to see. And without the brain and without the eyes, you can perceive, which is 360 degrees around. You can see details and overview at the same moment. You see it from a position out and above your body. You can this not explain by stating that consciousness is part of brain function.
I particularly liked the example, I think one of your lectures or in the book you also described, about the man who lost his denture. This is, would you mind just telling it again, because it's just, it's hilarious,
I'll
really.
tell it, yeah.
I mean, this cannot be hallucination, can it be?
No,
I mean.
but there have been two, there's a chapter in the book about near-death. There's another book, The Soul Does Not Die, by Irons, and about more than 200 cases or have been corroborated. This veridical perception have been corroborated by doctors, nurses, family members about the content and the time of this out-of-body experience. So it's conclusive that it has been at the moment There was no brain function. There was no heartbeat. But this patient that we're talking about was about 40 years old man who was found in a meadow unconscious by some people passed by, and they started to do some simple chest compression, and they called for an ambulance. And when he was brought into a hospital, cardiac ward, it was about more than 30 minutes later. They had been in the ambulance trying to do some resuscitation. Defibrillation didn't succeed at all. When he came into hospital, his body was cold, was blue, like just a dead body. No breathing, no circulation. Widened pupils didn't react to light. So the nurse who saw him first tried to give him extra oxygen by intubation, to give him a tube to give him more oxygen in the lungs. And then he found out that he had still dentures in the mouth, so he took out the dentures, upper dentures, put it somewhere on the crash cart. They did it 1.5 hours before he had blood pressure and circulation again. It was a long time, but he was young, so they went on. But he was still in artificial respiration. He was intubated, he was in deep coma. So he was transported to an intensive care unit to continue artificial respiration for 1 week. He was 1 week in coma. Then he came back after 1 week on the cardiac ward, and he was just on the cardiac ward. A nurse came in for medication, and he saw the nurse and said, "You know where my dentures are." And the nurse was flabbergasted. He said, "Well, you know you were there when I was coming to the hospital. You took out my dentures, you put it on a car with all those bottles on it, and there was a sliding underneath, and there you put my teeth." And you could describe the resuscitation room where he came in coma, and he left in coma. He could exactly describe the resuscitation room from a position out and above his body. He could see his body. He could recognize the nurse and doctors who had been busy with the CPR. So it shouldn't be possible at all.
No, that's what.
And there are more cases like this. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are more cases like this.
But this is really in your practice, right?
Yeah,
It's not. It's not a book that you read or in the.
I know
Yeah.
once, but in the early 90s, there was, I think it was ABC, NBC, or I don't know which company from, television company from the US, they interviewed the nurse as well. But he doesn't want to be interviewed anymore. But
I
sure.
can imagine.
But in the book, the soul does not die. It's also extensively written about this case.
I mean, it's just mind-boggling, right? And
It is.
after that, you go and say, no, consciousness is a byproduct of a brain function.
Well, the problem is, for most neuroscientists, they're frightened.
Frightened.
They're frightened to lose the worldview. They're frightened that what they have been telling, frightened what they have been studying, should be wrong. They lose the position in the universe, they lose the research money. They still have a lot of research money to look into the brain somewhere to find consciousness. And research is important about brain function. We're not for looking for consciousness in the brain, but you will never find consciousness in the brain anymore. So they can sometimes be very aggressive, or being a debunker, because they're really frightened to lose the position. And I know from professors personally tell me, you could be right, but officially said this is total nonsense, until they retire. And then they say, it could be right. So it's the position of the universe as well. So I understand why they react like this. I understand it. It's fear.
When you started your research, vast majority, still is, but then it was, 90% I would say, if not more, wouldn't touch this topic with a 5-meter pole, because it would ruin their career, it would ruin their, jobs, opportunities, family maybe, friends, circles. How was it for you?
Science is asking questions with an open mind. I was asking questions with an open mind. And it took some time to accept that there are was wrong in the dogma I've learned on university. But I was not interested at all in the opinion of others. There were only a few specialists in the hospital who were interested and asked me about it, but the most didn't ask me anything. And that was enough to know for me that they were not interested at all. It didn't matter at all. We had no funding at all for the research. The 10 years research we did in weekends, evenings, taking holidays, training volunteers for the longitudinal study, everything we did by our own. No funding at all. There was no funding for such a study. And it was also the challenge to find, when the Lancet published it, people were surprised. And later in England, when I gave a lecture, I met someone who knew someone with the editorial committee of the Lancet, who were discussing our article over the death experience in survivors of cardiac arrest in the Netherlands. And the problem was that the methodology, scientifically, was totally good. That was all right. But the subject, the death experience, that was a little bit a challenge. So there had been a long discussion, and they said, well, we have to publish it because the methodology is right. It's empirical science. But some people were surprised that it was published. It was a worldwide story. It was on the front page of all papers. I just came from India, and the Indian Times had it in the airplane. 2/3 of the front page was about our study. So it was a worldwide story as well. Yeah.
So you as a cardiologist, as a researcher, as a scientist, do you feel that you've done this, you left no stone unturned from point of view of traditional mainstream science to explain, to make sense of it?
No.
There is no more street that we could explore that would give us an explanation.
I've been reading everything what was possible in that time and was discussing it with a lot of people as well, worldwide. And there was no discussion left. I just wanted to understand that people had an experience what should be impossible according to our current paradigm. It should be impossible.
I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the consciousness and the body. Because if I think about it, the phenomenon like NDE, terminal lucidity, you also know that, right? And for example, donor personality transfer, another topic which is also interesting. They sort of point in the direction that consciousness is sort of independent of the functioning of the brain, right? So it points in that direction. Now, at the same time, we know that brain trauma produces either loss of cognitive abilities or savant abilities, and it sort of hints to some sort of an imprint or connection between consciousness and body. So it's a bit of a paradox, right? On one hand, we say consciousness functions outside of the brain. At the same time, this situation occurrences tell us no, but there is a relationship, there is a connection clearly between body and consciousness. So have you, for yourself,
oh yes, that's a
explained
good question.
that somehow?
Yes. Well, the question is, when you look television, is the program a product of your TV set?
Nope.
No. Where you have your computer and you go to internet, to the iCloud with 1 billion websites or 1 billion YouTube films, and you put some code in it, you receive a website or a YouTube film. Is it a product of your computer? No. So the computer or the TV set of your telephone, there are, at this very moment now, there are 1 billion websites going through us and through the walls, and 200, 300,000 telephone calls are going through us. It's electromagnetic informational waves. But you need a functional instrument to receive it. And it's the same with consciousness. Consciousness is beyond time and beyond space. It's always everywhere, inside and outside. But you receive it when you have a functioning brain, and the brain has a facilitating function and not a producing function to experience consciousness. It is also a kind of filter. There's a lot of information, but it filters it also a bit. As a transceiver, it transmits information from your body, your senses, to your consciousness. And receive information from consciousness into your body. So your brain is an instrument. Where your TV set is damaged, your program will not be fair or will you get lost. Where you have brain damage, the function of the brain is damaged, so your waking consciousness will be damaged. Where you have Alzheimer, your waking consciousness is damaged, but your real non-local consciousness cannot be damaged at all, because it's always there, in another dimension, without time, without space. So what you see, there is a connection between the function of the brain and consciousness. Where's your consciousness when you are asleep? There's always consciousness, but you don't receive it because your brain is in a kind of mode that you don't receive it. When you have general anesthesia, there's still activity in the brain, but you don't receive consciousness. When you're asleep, the deep sleep has a lot of activity in the brain, but you don't receive waking consciousness. So you need a good functioning instrument to receive waking consciousness. And you have a lot of examples where this you could prove. Let's say you mentioned some, but I will mention more. The end-of-life experience, when people are dying. Then they can have periods of enhanced consciousness that see deceased relatives, the deceased parents or partner. They see light, they see a landscape, they feel love or whatever. The difference within the NDE is that they are in the two dimensions at the same time, so they can discuss what they've seen. But usually in hospices and hospitals it is seen as hallucination of terminal problems or by side effects of drugs. But there have been studies done in Switzerland by a lady who went each day to all patients and were listening, making music, listening. And then she said more than 90% of dying patients have end-of-life experiences. So they are already a little bit out and then we're back in the body. And what you said, terminal lucidity, especially in patients with Alzheimer's disease, where you know how a brain looks like when you die from Alzheimer's. There's just some stuff left, but no brain. And there have been a lot of examples of patients with terminal lucidity, people who recognize the children for years, or even in coma, or don't speak for days or weeks. At once, they sit up in bed, look at the children, call them by name, say thank you, and die, which is impossible. But we know how the brain functions in the end stage of Alzheimer's disease. They have this conscious experience around the deathbed. That means when people die on a distance, when you're at home and at 4 o'clock you awake and think of your father and said, oh, I miss my father. And then the next morning you get a telephone call that your father died at that very moment. Perimortal experience. And sometimes you really are taken by them, or you see them as a being of light, or they show them their death experience as well. Then you have the shared death experience, what is that when you are at the deathbed of a loved one, there's sometimes the room changes, you see a lot of light, if you see a light bulb going out of the body, out of the head, but you don't see it, you perceive it. You don't see it with eyes, not everybody will perceive it. And sometimes they're taken with the death experience of the loved one. So you go through a tunnel to the light, sometimes see really even a life review of deceased relatives, and then you're back on the body, on the bed of the just died loved one there. So you're a normal person who is taken as a matter out of love for the people who is dying, to show them, they show you the death experience. And then the next thing is the after-death communication, that you are in contact with the conscious of deceased relatives in the first days, weeks or months after the death of a loved one. In the Netherlands, about 2 million people have after-death communication. In Europe, 125 million people. In the US, 100 million. But usually people don't talk about it. They said, I had a dream. Because usually it happens in sleep. Because when you sleep, the threshold of consciousness is lower. So people who have died can easily contact you because they make the decision to contact you. But it's not a sleep, not a dream, because they remember it always. It's life-changing. They can see them, feel them, touch them, smell them, have communication with them. It's different. But then you know that the consciousness of a deceased loved one is still there, somewhere. So consciousness, when you have contact with the consciousness of a deceased loved one, consciousness cannot be a product of brain function. They've died. And usually they come here, just once and say, don't worry, it's good with me. But sometimes they have, I know a story for children who have died, and then for years they come back when there's a problem with the man or the woman. The child who has died come back to help them and to advise them. So there's still a connection with the loved ones as well. So all these examples are, let's say, hard to explain by consciousness being a product of brain function.
I would say impossible.
I'm always a little question.
Yeah, but no.
So then the discussion is, it's not science at all to discuss these things. And then I say, what do you mean by science? I told you before, for me, the definition of science is asking a question with an open mind. But people who talk about science, they talk about materialist science. And the materialist science, that is true what you can objectify, what you can measure, what you can duplicate, what you can falsify. Then it is true. Now what you feel and what you think, your consciousness, you cannot objectify, you cannot duplicate, you cannot measure, and you cannot falsify. This consciousness, the essence of who you are, what you feel, what you think, is beyond our current materialist science. So they call it an illusion. But it is the essence of who we are. And we have to change, we have to expand science into a post-materialist science. We have to change the paradigm to include subjective experiences. Materialist science has done a lot of good, but it's not enough for subjective experience. So we have to expand science to a post-materialist science.
You say the primary, let's say, or the key change that needs to occur is that science should include subjective experiences into the scientific method. And do you think that perhaps we then are running a risk of losing science altogether, because we are opening a sort of a Pandora box, right? Because currently science it's about objectivity, it's about reproducibility, and you know, the scientific method worked well for us. That's what any science would tell. That's why we achieved what we achieved. We are just not sharing opinions. The moment we include subjective, it becomes my opinion versus your opinion. So we'll destroy something which worked for decades for humanity. What would you say to that?
It's not instead of materialist science, but it's expanding science. So the materialist aspect of science is still important, but it's not enough. So you have to expand science to include subjective experiences, which is the essence of who we are, which is a total different approach, where you realize that everything has its subjective aspects as well, where you realize that consciousness is fundamental, that everything comes from consciousness, that your body comes from consciousness. Plants have subjective aspects. Animals have the planet Earth have a subjective aspect, because everything is formed by consciousness together with information and energy. So it all has some kind of subjective aspects. And you cannot talk about it when you have just the material aspects of it, because you exclude a lot of essential. A living being is much more than just matter. A living being has a body. But a living being is conscious as well, especially human beings, but also animals, plants, or whatever. So when you talk about a living being, then it's more than just matter. So you have to include consciousness, subjective aspects, to understand living beings.
A friend of mine sent me a quote of Nikola Tesla,
Yeah, I know.
The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence. Would you agree to that? What could the science that really invests in studying the local consciousness lead to, in your view?
I would totally agree with him, with this quote. I think it's very important. The only thing I'm not that positive, let's say quantum physics came in the 1910 and then it took about 70 years to be accepted worldwide because it was a new paradigm. And I think the paradigm of consciousness being a non-materialist aspect will take time to get accepted. And Max Planck has said, founder of quantum physics, has said, a new idea will not be easily accepted by convincing scientists, but you have to wait until they die. And a new generation will grow up and think it's totally easy to understand. And the younger generation, which I mean is much more open for the new approach of science, the new approach of consciousness than the older generation. They're still in their dogma. What I would like to call willful ignorance.
Prefer not to know.
Prefer not to know. And it's also a lot of prejudice. And it's also the same as neuroscience. It's a lot of prejudice and willful ignorance. Because if it could be true, the other theory, your worldview will collapse. And that's frightening, isn't it?
And especially if you graduated, your thesis, you wrote, you published books about within specific framework on.
I never will try to convince people. I just come with the facts. And they have to think about it. And when they don't want to accept it, it's their problem. It's not my problem.
We play our role, right? And we hope that somehow the impact is there for other people to receive.
If they want to know about it. And that's where it starts. And the younger population is much better for it.
But I think NDE becoming less of a taboo already, in my feeling.
Oh, yes.
If you look back a couple of, 10 years or so, I mean, to begin with, NDE is fairly recent term, right? It was coined in 1975 or something.
Yes, and I'm
we are
studying it in
gradually
86, so I'm doing it now for 37 years.
30, yeah.
So, and I
But
think
it's more accepted also among doctors, I think.
The most important aspect of near-death experience is the study prospective in survivors of cardiac arrest, because then we know that the consciousness can be a product of brain function, because the brain doesn't function at all. But there are a lot of other circumstances that near-death experience can occur. Let's say critical medical situation like lots of blood in complicated childbirth, coma by traffic accident of cerebrovascular problems, near drowning with children. But you can also have this kind of enhanced conscious experience in meditation, in isolation, shipwrecks, astronauts. You can have a severe depression. Just walking in nature can have the same experiences. End-of-life experience, what I told you. Fear-death experiences, when you have an impending traffic accident, when you see on a road, there's a car passing the other car, and you say, well, this will be the end of mountaineering accidents. Then you get an out-of-body experience and have a life review, etc., and then it went just well. So fear-death you can have as well. So not always you have to have a critical medical situation to have this kind of experience of enhanced consciousness. But for a scientific aspect, it is important to study the patient with the near-death experience in cardiac arrest.
I like your quote from Dave Hammarskjöld.
Yeah.
Our ideas about death define how we live our life.
Yeah.
And for me, it's definitely true, because many years ago I watched a documentary with Dr. Eben Alexander, and my life was on a completely different trajectory. And after I watched that, I was like, wow, and you don't think about your next career move or bigger car or bigger house. You start, what is this life all about? It's not about the toys, right, in life. It must be something bigger to this picture. But what needs to happen for real change occurring in the hearts and minds of people, not only scientists, but in general, to do this paradigm shift?
Most people
from
still
consumism, from material.
most people still believe that death is the end of who we are. People, there's nothing left. And we have this idea that you live as this world, this life will be everything. Then it's about power, about money, about a big car, about a young body, about a lot of clothes, about whatever. Just external factors. They don't think about the future of our planet, because they will be gone. So when you know that there is a continuity of consciousness after the death of the body, that consciousness has always been there before birth and after death, that consciousness is the essence of who we are, that everything what we perceive is a product of our consciousness. What we call reality is a subjective reality based on the state of consciousness we have. Where you're in love, the world is beautiful. Where you're depressed, the world is awful. It's the same world. So it's a subjective aspect of your how you experience it. So it starts with consciousness. So you have to change your consciousness to change the world. But you cannot change someone else. You cannot change the world. You can change yourself. That is when you realize that the essence of who you are is still important to change things. It has an eternal aspect. It's all about love. Everything is connected. What you do to others will come to you back. Positive things and negative things will come back to you, because everything is connected. How you treat other people will come back to you. How you treat animals and plants and nature will come back to you as well. So when you change the way you treat others, it will be better for the world as a whole.
How did it impact your life? Your life?
Well,
Was it
changed,
gradual change, or
Yeah,
are you
gradual
just like
change.
one day you woke up and say, that's it, I
No,
understand?
it's a
that,"
gradual
or-
change.
Gradual change, yeah.
My wife is very open as well. She started with physiotherapy, but then she did Tai Chi and Qigong, and she had some acupressure, and then she did yoga. The practice was on the attic. We have a huge attic. It's sort of 10 patients could be there as well for her. She knows a lot about anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner, but we've been in Tibet. We've read a lot about Tibetan Buddhism, the Vedas, the Upanishads, Gnostic Christianity, whatever. I started to read the Bible. I'd never read the Bible as a child. I was not had not a religion education at all. So it changed a lot. So my wife is a strict vegetarian. At home we are vegetarian. In a restaurant, sometimes a year I eat some fish. But we're just vegetarian. We're eating biological dynamic food based on anthroposophy. We have a center each Saturday, about 15 families come for the vegetables. We have a former biological dynamic farm close by here. It brings vegetables for about 15 families. We do it already for 25 years. We love the garden. We love nature. We always try to be there in nature each time, walking. We have silence in the house, always silence. Just when we want to listen to music, we do it, but mostly it's just silence. I work in silence, I think in silence, I read in silence. So that's the way we live now. A lot outside, a lot of nature. In the morning we hear the birds. And I might never be able to live in a city as well.
Sounds great, actually.
But so we feel privileged.
Yes.
We're grateful. We have 2 children and they're wonderful. We have 5 grandchildren, they're doing wonderful. So we're just grateful each day again. We live by day and day.
Pim, what is the most important insight you could share with people from your life, from your research, from your own learning?
I think the most important thing to realize that everything it's about love. Love towards yourself, to love towards others, love towards the planet, love towards animals, and because we're connected. We're always connected here in this life, and we'll be connected when we die as well. We will always connected. In a non-local conscious realm, we are always connected as well. So the way you live changes everything. to try to change the way you live. And it is also by changing your consciousness. It's about love, interconnectedness, empathy, compassion, nature.
And how do you yourself see death? What is death then, in your view?
I don't think I'm afraid of death. Perhaps people with NDE are 100% no fear. I think I have 98% no fear at all. I'm just curious. I'm just curious to know. That's it.
Wonderful. That's the motto of your life, right? I'm just curious about NDE. I'm just curious.
Yes.
I think it's a great attitude to life. I think it's fantastic.
Enjoy each day.
Exactly.
Tomorrow I can be dead. You too. Everybody.
Yeah,
You know.
anybody can be.
Yeah. Enjoy life each day you can.
Great.
And be happy. And be
Exactly.
grateful. That's it.
Dr. Pim van Lommel, thank you very much for this interview.
You're welcome. Are we already finished?
Yes, I think so.
No question
We
left.
have- I guess we
Well,
can-
you started.
we can
We
bring
just
it-
started.
No, we can. Let's do it again.
Yeah,